You know, configuring devices in Microsoft 365 can be a tricky affair. So in this episode, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know in order to get you up and running as quickly as possible. Stay tuned, you're going to learn something. Greetings my fellow YouTubers, so nice to see you and a very warm welcome to my channel, especially if this is your first visit. You know, configuration of devices and users in the mobile space is quite confusing and it's becoming quite busy. And with Microsoft Intune getting ever more complicated, it's super important that you know what you're doing. Now, Microsoft have also got a new course out, MD102, configuring Microsoft Intune. So if you're looking to get certified in this, then this is definitely the course that you want to head for. Now, in this episode, we're going to take you through everything that you need to know in order to get up and running. So we're going to look at not only configuring devices, but also what are the different components in Intune and how they all come together. Now, if you've got questions about this or in fact any of my sessions, as always, just get those down below and I'll always do my best for you. And if you've not subscribed, it would be great to have you on board. So bump the subscribe button up there, ring that bell, and you'll be notified of any new postings and videos. So without any more jibber jabber, let's jump in and take a look at these demos. You enjoy. So here I am in Azure Active Directory, and I just want to pop into users and all users here. And I just want to mention just where I'm starting this demo. I've gone ahead and deployed Azure AD Connect. My users have synced in, and at the moment I've just gone ahead and licensed this user, Aaron Nichols, with an E5 and an EMNS license. Common question is, Andy, do I need to have that for Intune? Absolutely not, no. You can have either Business Premium, you can have an E3 license, but you do need the Enterprise Mobility and Security, or you can purchase just a standalone Intune license for the user. All right. Now, in terms of the numbers of devices, it's not based on the devices, it's really based on the user license. So you can have up to 5 physical devices, so PCs and Macs, as well as a number of mobile devices, for example, iPhones, iPads, and so on. So once you've done that, I've gone ahead and configured that. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to just pop over into devices and I'm going to come in here into all devices. Now, again, I've not done anything with this demo. All I've done is deployed Azure AD Connect, and you see that DC1 has come in. It's a Windows machine, but it's in hybrid mode. And what that means is it's not currently being managed by any mobile device management. You see there's no manage option, but you can see it in Azure Active Directory. Now, the benefit of this is if you do have hybrid devices, then you can manage them a little bit with things like conditional access. So that's quite useful. However, if you want to get full benefit, of course, then you really do need to switch a few settings on. So first up, those settings are here. So I'm going to come into my device settings, and in my device settings, you can see Azure AD Join and registration settings. So users can join their devices, and I've just gone ahead and said all users can join, but of course you can do it where it's just selected users as well. Users may also register their devices. This is grayed out because you can go ahead and you can join the devices. Again, we'll talk about devices in Intune in a moment and you'll see that. Require multi-factor authentication when you join or register those devices. Now, by default here, it's just switched off, but in reality, my friends, you would probably want to go ahead and actually enable that for an additional layer of security. Now it says what's the maximum number of devices per user? 50 is way too many. So I would probably keep that about 20, keep it manageable and easy to manage. We also have LAPS, which is the new local administrator password service. And this is currently in preview, so I can go ahead and I can enable that on there as well. And again, restricting users from recovering BitLocker keys on mobile devices. Again, you might not want users to do that. You might want it to be an admin function. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on save, and that's the first part. Now, a common question is, Andy, why is it called Endpoint Manager and Intune here? Well, Endpoint Manager really relates to the security components. So really here what we're looking at are a number of different tools. So basically we've got devices and apps. This is Microsoft Intune. And then of course you've got the security component. This is the endpoint. Now, first of all, to enable users to register devices in Intune, what we need to do is we need to come into devices here. And again, you can choose your device. So, for example, it might be Windows, iOS, iPads, Mac OS, Android, Chrome OS, or now even Linux as well. Just a common question that I always get is, Andy, do I need to have any kind of special software or special settings? The only thing you need, if you're deploying iOS and Mac OS, then you will need to, basically, if you go into enroll devices here, so it's super simple to do with Apple enrollment. Essentially, you go in and you need to basically register for what we call an MDM certificate. And you just go through the process here, and you put in your Apple ID. And once you get your MDM certificate, which is valid for 1 year, by the way, you can then go off and you can start configuring devices. I'm going to do a separate video on this, so definitely watch out for that in the not too distant future. All right, so again, I'm going to come down into devices here. I'm going to come into enroll devices. And the first thing that we've got here is something called automatic enrollment. So in here, you're basically giving your users the authorization to go ahead and join their devices, typically mobile devices, into Microsoft Intune. And you can say no users, some users, and you can specify who those users are, or you can just go ahead and do a blanket join. And in this case, that's what I'm going to do. Now, MDM, of course, means mobile device management. And the other one, of course, is mobile application management. So if you want to deploy applications to mobile devices, again, you can choose those here. There are a number of pages that you can configure. So there's a discovery page, there's a terms of use page, and there's also a compliance page that you can configure as well. So once you've done that, simply click on save, and we're basically ready to go. So now that we've granted access to the MDM or mobile device management, the next thing is we're going to just flip over here into settings. I'm going to go into accounts and scroll down. And now what we want to do is we want to do an Azure AD join. Now, when we do an Azure AD join, I'm just going to click on connect here. And the first thing that you need to know is, do you want to join this device to Azure Active Directory or Active Directory? So if you're using a local domain using Windows Server, this is one or the other. And it's basically who has authority over the account. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Azure Active Directory in this case. And again, the reason I'm doing that is because I'm joining the workstation to Azure Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put in Aaron's credentials and I click on OK. And I'm going to put in his password here and again, just sign in. Now that can take a few moments just to register that machine. Okay, so now that Aaron is logged in, what are the main benefits here? So I'm going to just open up a browser here, and I'm just going to go to office.com, And just to show you that one of the real benefits, of course, is that you'll notice it didn't even prompt me for any kind of authentication here, so the user didn't need to log in. And the reason is, of course, is because Aaron is already authenticated into Azure Active Directory. How cool is that? That is such a great thing. So he has got pure single sign-on. Now, although Aaron's account is actually sitting in Active Directory, he can have a device in Azure Active Directory, and he gets all the benefits of being still, if you want to maintain his user account on premises, but the device is all managed in Intune. All right, so now what you can do with that, well, what I'm going to do is, now that we've logged on to Intune, let's take a look at it from the management perspective. So here I am back in my portal, and I'm just going to go back to the home page here, and I'm going to flip down into devices. So if I click into Windows devices here, you can now see, sure enough, that Aaron's machine is now logged in to Intune. And more than that, it's detecting that it's a corporate machine, it's compliant, it's running Windows, and you can see the name of the user here. Now, the big difference between this and the Azure Hybrid Join machine is that we can now completely manage this machine. So now you can see the properties, you can view the hardware of this machine, what apps are actually on the device, whether the device is compliant, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about whether the device has a configuration policy. And out of the box, you can see that there's nothing configured at the moment. So we have a number of configuration options that we can do. We can deploy a configuration profile for the device. We can deploy a compliance profile for the device. We can also manage things like apps as well, so app configurations. And again, things like BitLocker, the local admin password. So if you want to, for example, back up the local admin password, this is the new lapse feature, which is now available. Also, you can configure things like the user experience, and then you've got some kind of management and reporting options down at the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head back into my device. So here in my WS1 device, what options do I have? Well, from a management perspective, I can now retire this device. So if I no longer want this device to be in our organization, I can get rid of it. If you think about, hey, Aaron's leaving the company, I maybe want to do a remote wipe, or indeed, if the device has been stolen or lost, this could be an invaluable function. If you want to delete the device completely, again, you can do that. We also have some new features which are available in premium. So things like remote lock, you can do that, but you do need a premium license for that. You can sync, so if you make any changes to the configuration, this will force the device to synchronize. Likewise, passcode, you can reset that. Again, some of these are premium, and in fact, if you're using things like multi-factor authentication, some of these you may want to consider using that instead. You can also restart the device. You've got other features here. So for example, doing quick antivirus scans here, they're always quite useful. And we also have a new remote assistance feature, which again is a premium feature. So you can pay a little bit more for that. But again, some of these are absolutely awesome. So that's managing the device. Right, so next what we'll do is let's now take a look at configuring the device then for Intune. So now we've deployed a device, we know how to manage the device. The next thing is, how can we configure the device? Now, traditionally in Windows, of course, you'll be familiar with the fact that you can have things like group policies. So, for example, in a traditional domain environment, so for example, here I'm on my domain controller, and if I scroll down, of course, we have something called group policy management. So this is essentially allows you, so if I just come in here, and you can see that I'm just going to come into my domain called Contoso. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and into Contoso here, and let me just expand this out. I've got my default domain policy. Now, your default domain policy essentially contains your computer configuration and your user configuration settings. So anything that you configure at the computer configuration will essentially affect every user who logs on at that device. User configuration, it will affect the user irrelevant of the device that they log into. And that's typically a domain, what we call group policies. So how do we accomplish this then in Azure Active Directory? So it's actually quite simple. And again, it's not kind of rocket science. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into devices here. And now we've already talked about enrolling the devices. So the next thing then is obviously configuring the devices. So I'm going to scroll down and we have a number of what we call policies that you can now apply. So the first one that I want to take a look at then is a configuration policy. Now, a configuration policy, as you can see, it basically is a profile. Now, you can actually import your group policy settings. So you can export a group policy as what we call an ADMX template, and you can import those into group policy if you want to. Or I can just go ahead and actually create a profile of my own. So again, I simply choose the platform. So what platform am I choosing for here? So in this case, I'm choosing for a Windows 10 or later. And am I looking for the settings or just certain templates? Let's go for the templates. So we have a number of different templates here. And again, if you're familiar with group policy, many of these are going to look very kind of familiar to you. So again, I can scroll through this. You can see there's Wi-Fi settings, health monitoring, wireless settings, and so on. I'm going to choose admin templates. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. And again, here you can see it's now asking me for a name. So I'm just going to call this my Oslo office. Let's say we'll call this my Oslo office template. I'm going to click on next. And you can see now it's got all the settings for me. So check it out. If I want to, let's say, configure things like Google, the local administrator password service, Microsoft Edge, the browser. Again, these are just some examples. Things like OneDrive settings, your system settings. There are literally hundreds of settings here that you can go through. So I can go through to the control panel here. I can go into, let's say, things like, do I want to personalize it? If I want to block a certain setting in control panel, for example, force a specific start background color or a menu option here, prevent changes to the start background, you prevent users from enabling the lock screen camera, for example. So again, I could just go ahead, I can click onto that, and that will essentially write that into the registry. So there we go. I can then click on next. And then it says, okay, do you want to, who's the scope for? Who is this for? If you're using tagging, and this can be quite useful, you can add that in. And then, of course, I can assign it to a user or a group. So I can go ahead, I can add all users here if I want to, or I can go ahead and add all managed devices. So you can see here that I've now added and I've only got one device here as an example, but you can now see I've gone ahead and I can include, I can exclude, and so on. Again, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create that policy, and there you go. You can see it just takes a moment just to come in, and I will just refresh this page, and in a second you'll see that this policy has actually been created. So just give it a moment. Okay, there you go. And that's how you create policies, or profiles. So as I said, these are device profiles. So any devices that are managed would then be enforced by this. Now, another technology that you definitely want to probably take a look at are compliance policies. So, for example, with compliance policies, I can create different types of policies. So I mentioned earlier that, for example, if I've got, let's say, Android, or let's do iOS, for example. So if I've got users bringing in iOS devices onto my network, so I can call this my Oslo compliance policy. Okay, so I'll call it my Oslo compliance policy. So I'll click on next, and again in here, now compliance is such an important area. So for example, do you want to have your users required to use email? And this is a particularly important one, jailbroken, especially on multiple devices. So you definitely want to block jailbroken devices. Require the device to be under a certain security level. You can do that. Then you've got things like device properties. So, within your organization, if you want to support a minimum or a maximum iOS version or operating system version, or a build for support purposes, you can put that in. Things like, do you want to enforce things like Defender for Endpoint? In terms of system security, do you want to allow things like biometrics? So enforcing passwords, biometrics, you can, as I said, you can configure all of these. So again, require a password to unlock. And then, of course, you can then start configuring all these other features. This is also really useful. Remember, this is all about compliance. I can actually go through and restrict certain apps on these devices. And you can see that you get the app name. I'm often asked, where do you get the app bundle ID? So when you install an app into Azure Active Directory these days, so basically if you come up here, and if I go into applications, so just expand this menu a little bit here. So if I come into applications here and enterprise applications, because Azure Active Directory is a database, everything essentially has an ID. So all you need to do is, once you've installed the app, every single app will have an app ID. Now, irrelevant of the store that you're bringing that device or that app in. So all you would then do is put in the name of the app, paste in the ID, and then you're pretty good to go. So now that I've created that, again, I can now create some rules. So what are the actions for non-compliance? So do you want to just send a user an email and just say, look, maybe your device is out of date. Maybe you want to consider updating your device. And you can have multiple attempts. So ultimately, of course, if they just simply do not respond, then you can essentially block that device there. So I'm going to click on that. The next thing, again, I can add this to a group. I can add it to all users. And again, I can add it to all devices as well. Just click on next. And there we go. I now go ahead and create my compliance policy. And you can see here, once that policy has been deployed, you'll then get an overview of exactly if there are any devices that are non-compliant, perhaps the user's having an issue, you can then go in and of course help the user out. All right. So that is that. So in terms of devices, the other things that we've got, you can also do conditional access rules on the devices. So for example, the user is only allowed to use this device from a specific location, and so on, or a specific app on this device. Check out my Microsoft Entra Identity playlist. I've done a number of videos on conditional access that give you complete step-by-step guides, so definitely check those out. So in addition to configuration and compliance, I can also deploy scripts. So if you've got a PowerShell script you want to deploy, then you can go ahead and you can do that. You can also deploy updates, of course, and again I'll cover these in future sessions. A quick tip, by the way, is if you don't want to deploy policies one by one, check it out. You can create these things called policy sets. And with a policy set, it's essentially you can create bundles of rules. So it includes not just devices, but also app policies as well. Which takes me, of course, to apps. So one of the really cool things about Intune is that you can deploy and manage apps for any of the managed devices that you have. And more than that, once you've enrolled those, so again, you just basically install the app and connect it to the App Store, you can then enforce kind of policies on those particular apps as well. So, and again, I'm going to cover this in a future video. So things like app protection policies. App protection policies, for example, if a user's out of the office and they've got OneDrive, you might not want the user downloading files onto personal devices. You've got things like, again, app configuration policies. So again, configuring those applications. You've also got a number of kind of dedicated policies. Oh, and by the way, of course, unlike days of old, you don't actually need to physically download Microsoft Office, because users can download it themselves. But what you can do, of course, is you can create app policies for Office. So I can, again, I'll just call this Office 1. But again, I can go in here now and I can create configuration policies for Microsoft Office. And I can specify, is it selected groups of users or selected devices? Again, I can just go ahead and do a configuration. So if there was a setting in Microsoft Office that you wanted to configure, again, you can do that. Now, there are literally, as you can see, thousands of policies here. So a good tip is to come in and you can actually search for the product that you want to search for. And again, you can then go down and you can then configure this as you wish or as you seem fit. Now, of course, one of the cool things that's coming into Microsoft 365 is the Microsoft Copilot service. And you can bet that this is a service that is really going to make a difference here in the not too distant future. So watch out for that. All right. Now, the final component, just kind of giving you this walkthrough, of course, is EndPoint Security. So the second part of Endpoint Manager is really Endpoint Security. And again, this really comes into its own because you can configure things like antivirus policies. So of course, every Windows device has got Windows Defender on it. So you can come in here and you can create a policy that will basically make sure that things like Windows Defender is up to date. You can also enable things like disk encryption, so things like BitLocker. And what this does is it backs up the user's BitLocker keys into Azure Active Directory in case of disaster. You can also configure things like firewall rules. So of course, we're talking endpoint firewall here as well. Again, you've also got other useful features which are incorporated into Defender for Endpoint, such as things like attack surface reduction, things like user account protection, and again, device compliance conditional access. These are just shortcuts to what I showed you earlier. So you can see that there is so much in Microsoft Intune, and just by spending a little bit of time, again, how do I get a chance to play with this, Andy? Definitely take out a Microsoft E5 or an EMNS subscription. You can try it for 30 days. Just Google and just say, you know, I want to try a Microsoft 365 E5 trial for 30 days, and you'll get one, and it's absolutely free. You don't need a credit card, so definitely check it out, and you'll definitely learn a lot. So there you have it, Microsoft Intune in a nutshell. I hope you're a little bit wiser about what this fantastic piece of software does. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed it, bump the like button. It does make a difference. And if you've not subscribed, as always, click that subscribe button, ring the bell, and come on board and join our learning community. And if you've got questions, then as always, just get those down below and I'll do my best for you. So that's it for this time. I'll see you next time. Stay safe. See you soon. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.